Hello there, my name is the Prim Reaper, and it's very nice to meet all of you. Before I begin, I want to thank Bane666 very much for giving me a spot to talk on his channel. I deeply appreciate it. Now, as a preface, I identify as an egalitarian, not a feminist. When I explain to people why this is the case, I tell them that I've seen far too many examples of feminists downplaying male issues as though they somehow take away from the conversation about women. They so often tout that feminism stands for equality, but many of them seem to forget what that word means. In this video, I thought it might be interesting to showcase a few examples in my own life that have led me to this conclusion. One of my earlier examples of this occurred in a discussion on Reddit several years ago. It's been a long time, but as I recall, someone was complaining that they'd been unfriended by a feminist for the crime of talking about male rape victims. I responded by telling them that it was good that that person had saved him the trouble of needing to remove that negativity from his life, and most of the other people in the thread were equally supportive. But then one person came into the thread talking about how there wasn't a culture of victimization surrounding men, and how male rape victims were a small problem compared to female rape victims. You know, as if talking about or supporting male victims of rape would somehow take something away from female rape victims. I responded by telling that person that it's not a small problem to the men who go through it, and downplaying it just because it happens less often will result in unnecessary suffering. The person then had the stones to ask me what I've done for male rape victims other than simply commenting on Reddit. I couldn't believe it. I said, even if all I've done is to be supportive of male victims when they talk to me about what they've been through, to serve as a source of empathy and non-judgment, it's a hell of a lot better than going around saying that male victims are less important than female victims because they're victims less often. That's some of the dumbest logic I've ever heard. It would be like telling sufferers of prostate cancer that they don't need as much help or acknowledgement because it's less common than breast cancer. Oh wait, a lot of people already kind of do that, don't they? And it's not even less common at all. On to the second example I'll talk about today. As people who follow my channel are aware, I volunteer at a crisis hotline. One of the experiences that always makes me feel bad is when I get a male caller calling in looking for shelter or for help dealing with contentious relationships or child custody rights. Obviously, I can't ethically go into any details of the calls, but very rarely are there any male-oriented shelters or other resources that I can offer to them where this is obviously not the case with women. I recall talking to someone once about how I wish that there were more services available for men. Their response was to ask me why I was only interested in services for men, especially when women are more likely to need shelters. Now, aside from the fact that domestic violence is a lot closer to a 50-50 issue than many people think, I informed them that it's not like I was suggesting that we tear down the women's shelter and replace it with Guys R Us. But the key point here is that women have a lot of support available to them already. And as an egalitarian, we have to look at where support is lacking and address those needs fairly as well. Especially considering that, oftentimes, the only real resource available for men in domestic violence is aimed at guys who are thinking of committing violence against their partners. Like, are you kidding me? It astounds me that some people treat this like a zero-sum game. We don't have to divert resources from women in order to give them to men. All we have to do is acknowledge that men are people too, and that it's unfair to give all of our support to only half of the population. The final incident I'll talk about involves my wild and crazy belief that men who are accused of sexual assault deserve a fair trial just as much as anyone else. My most recent personal example happened when the Jian Ghomeshi trial was taking place. I'll admit that I was completely ignorant of what was going on until I saw a couple of people online complaining about the fact that he'd been acquitted. One person in particular called it a miscarriage of justice. It was at this point that I decided to look up the details of the case. In my mind, it was a pretty clear case of hell fury and a woman scorned. After all, you'd be hard-pressed to get me to send lusty photos, flowers, and letters of admiration to someone who had supposedly assaulted me. So I replied to that person with, "A miscarriage of justice seems like an instance of the justice system doing exactly what it's meant to do." How did they respond? By deleting the entire post and sending me a message accusing me of being anti-victim. What? How could I be anti-victim if there wasn't a victim in the first place? Now, it's entirely possible that Ghomeshi was a total sleazy asshole about his sexual escapades, but given that in at least one woman's case, she was begging for more afterwards, it probably wasn't assault. At least, not until he wasn't interested in an encore, conveniently enough. The person I was talking to then went on to say that women can behave in peculiar ways after an assault, because that's not super ridiculously patronizing or anything. I responded by saying that implying that grown women aren't in control of their actions, especially when it comes down to those actions having the potential to destroy another man's life for all her fury, is infantilizing and dangerous. It seemed clear that the person I was talking to was no fan of Ghomeshi's, and that's fine. But the law is not meant to be a tool that we use to bludgeon the lives of people we don't like. If we start getting lax on the concept of innocent until proven guilty, we'd be going down a mighty scary road. I want to stress that I'm not anti-victim. I think that women who make accusations of sexual assault should be supported and guided gently through the legal process. But to automatically believe them is to increase the risk of a different kind of victim, the accused having his life ruined by a false or at least greatly exaggerated story. Look at Ghomeshi. Even though he was found not guilty in the end, his name had been plastered all over the media for all to see before the gavel had even been swung. His reputation is permanently ruined, and people are still baying for his blood even after the verdict. This is unfortunately common. I think a good middle ground is to simply keep all names and events involved with the trial private until said trial has been concluded, and perhaps even afterwards to a certain extent. In this way, we can support both men and women, you know, as the definition of equality is intended. Fighting for men and women's rights is not mutually exclusive. With very few exceptions, we all have men and women in our lives that we care about. I don't know how people who bristle at the thought of men's rights can reconcile this reaction with the fact that they probably have a father or a brother or a significant other that they love and presumably would hate to see mistreated, but I unfortunately see it a lot within feminist circles. This is probably the main reason I don't associate myself with feminism and instead prefer the label egalitarian. And I think the next time that I'm questioned why, as an egalitarian, I'm more focused on men's issues than I am with women's issues, I'll just tell them, your defensive reaction when I brought it up, your insistence on making the conversation about women, that's why I'm more focused on men's issues. Because until we reach a point where both sides' problems are treated with equal weight, I'll be on the side of the scale that needs more assistance. Thanks again to Bane666 for the slot on his channel. If you liked this video and would like to see more of me, please check out and subscribe to my channel, The Prim Reaper. Thanks so much, and I hope to see you all again in the future.